Computer games have captured the soul of a generation. For the first time in history, we can create a new and more thrilling version of life. You can be a soldier, a superhero, a super vixen, or a mythical warrior. You are master of the universe. Computer games are a force of darkness and light, from fighting wars to spreading propaganda and mayhem. They are a crucial part of our future, and whether you play them or not, computer games are going to change your life. Consumers now spend $25 billion a year on computer games and game systems. 800 million people worldwide are regular players. Their massive popularity has made them into a 21st century entertainment force that rivals Hollywood. Every year, the biggest companies in the industry try to outdo each other in an effort to create buzz for their new games.
All the trades, the retailers, the financial analysts, the promotion partners like Coca-Cola and McDonald's, whoever we want to do tie-ins with, they all come here to see who's hot and who's not.
It's a high-stakes business. The development cost of a new game has gone from $40,000 to $10 million in a decade. 80% of games fail in the first year. But for those who succeed here, the payoff is huge. The game industry's biggest hitmaker is Will Wright. He's the creator of the most popular game in history, The Sims, a game where players create a new and better version of real life.
I think if I imagine games and the impact they've had on our culture, I think probably the biggest impact is that the way kids learn, especially about complex things. Rather than pick up a book and start learning theories, they actually can be thrown into these complex environments, and they will just kind of randomly start mashing buttons and looking at the results. And I think that way of relating to the world is kind of very different than the generation that preceded them.
As the creator of a hit that has sold almost 60 million copies, Will Wright is game royalty, the industry's Steven Spielberg. After years in development, Will Wright is ready to launch his newest game, Spore, where the player begins as a single-celled organism and climbs the evolutionary ladder to become the creator of an entire world. In a shrewd marketing move, he invites his friend, comedy great Robin Williams, to test drive the game.
Mr. Robin Williams.
My English is not so good.
Yeah, let's bring him to life and just see how long before basically this one's eaten.
I put it over here. I think I flip out it. Oh no, hold on.
This is a creature who can kiss its own ass.
Hold on. 2 mouths. This is obviously a creature developed in Hollywood. It can talk out of both sides.
Games, to me, have always represented kind of the playful side of life. In fact, I think play and games are both aspects of education, and I really enjoy learning things. And so I think our culture has kind of disconnected the idea of play from education, as play is this disposable, meaningless thing. In fact, play is one of the most meaningful activities that we can engage in.
You'll see all around the country, kids will go to bed early when they're frustrated with a homework problem, and they'll stay up late when they're interested in a level in a game. They will put more energy into it because the game rewards their engagement with it because there's a sense of accomplishment built into the game over time.
This demographic moves fast, they think fast, they multitask, they need to be engaged, they need to be interactively involved with entertainment, and that's what gaming does. So it's by far and away the preferred form of entertainment. 18 to 34-year-old men have reduced their daily consumption of television down to 27 minutes. By contrast, they're now spending 2 hours a night on average playing games, 4 times what they spend on television.
What we have in the digital generation is a new sort of sense that they're able to change the image on the screen. They're able to communicate through the image on the screen. They're able to express themselves through the image on the screen.
There's never been a time before when you had another world to go to. When you had your Narnia, you went into the wardrobe and it was somewhere else. Never before have people had the option of saying, I don't like this physical world I've got, I'm going somewhere better.
Games represent probably the most powerful new form of expression that's emerged in the last 30 or 40 years. I think if you look at the history of any new media technology, what you discover is that young people are among the early adopters and adapters of that technology, that they move in quickly. They're looking for a world that their parents haven't already occupied. It's outside the realm of their parents' experience.
Computer games are creating a revolution in the way we play and the way we live. They may even be changing the way we think. They are the native language of a new virtual world. It is a world that already exists in South Korea, the most wired country on the planet. Here, computer gamers are national heroes, rich, famous, and sought after. A large match between elite players can draw 25,000 passionate and partisan fans. 23-year-old Kang Min is one of Korea's top players and one of the most famous people in the country. He's been a professional gamer since the age of 16.
I make more money than most other gamers. I make a lot of money.
The game he plays is now the country's newest spectator sport, StarCraft. In a good year, Kang Min can make $250,000 playing this strategy game. It requires razor-sharp intelligence and is played at a blinding velocity, like chess at warp speed. Kang Min is one of the fastest players ever and can execute over 500 separate actions every minute. He routinely practices more than 14 hours a day. The team sponsor is KTF, one of the largest cell phone companies in the country.
2005년 5월 9일
The popularity of this new spectator sport is driven by 2 TV channels devoted exclusively to game programming. They're equal parts MTV and ESPN. StarCraft matches attract the highest ratings. The television producers have masterminded the creation of a star system designed to appeal to a largely female audience. The best and the cutest players are media darlings and have fan clubs with hundreds of thousands of members. In South Korea, computer nerds are the sex symbols for the 21st century. Behind the scenes, the life of a pro gamer is less glamorous. There are over 100 matches each year with no off-season. The players range in age from 16 to 24 and spend long periods away from their families. Before an important match, the team sponsor sends the team out of Seoul to train in isolation. For their financial backers, this team is serious business. In the past 5 years, KTF has invested over $50 million to create a championship-winning team. They are a marketing juggernaut. Having a winning team is all part of a strategy to create cachet for their mobile phones among young teenagers. The day of the match, Kang Min is met by his devoted fans. Each sponsor has its own team colors, and the broadcasters fuel the rivalry between the opposing teams with a pregame show calculated to fire up the fans. The match is a television event, broadcast live with color commentators. The winning team will take home a $100,000 prize. Tonight, the KTF team is competing against their arch rivals, SK Telecom. KTF gets off to an early lead, decisively taking the first match. Min is next up. Most individual matches are over in less than 15 minutes. A player wins by destroying his opponent's bases and fighting forces. It's a battle of strategy and speed. The audience hangs on every move the players make. StarCraft is second nature to the digital natives of Korea.
Everyone has played it. Everyone knows how it works. Everyone knows the rules and the strategy. If you've grown up and you've spent your whole life playing these video games like StarCraft, you know exactly what makes someone really good at it. So when you look at the screen, you see something that other people don't see. In the same way that the guy who's sitting on the couch watching Monday Night Football sees stuff that his wife doesn't see because he knows the rules, he knows the players, he can see all this stuff.
Tonight, Min suffers a crushing defeat, leaving his fans and backers to wonder if he's losing his edge. If Min's hands slow down, even by milliseconds, his career could be over. The average length of a career is only 6 years.
10대 때 시작했다 그러면 If you started when you were a teenager, you can work for 10 years at the most. As in any sport, you become weaker in this job as you get older.
Tonight, the SK Telecom players are the new champions.
I have never regretted what I do. I think my job is the best job, because more than anything else, I get to do what I like.
As a career, being a pro gamer is for the very young, but the strategic skills these gamers develop are giving them a second chance at earning big money. Retired gamers are being recruited by financial institutions to be trained as stockbrokers. In the United States, some gamers have a different career path. The U.S. Army is turning them into soldiers. For the U.S. Army, computer games are a priority of the highest order. They are investing millions of dollars to train the next generation of soldiers. Computer games are the key to bringing the world's biggest fighting machine into the 21st century. First, the Army needs to lure young Americans into a life of military service. The battle for the hearts and minds of the gamer generation is underway.
Let me put it this way. We're a volunteer army. We're competing with industry for the attention and potentially to employ the best folks we can attract.
The Army has found that the old ways of reaching kids had stopped working. At the turn of the millennium, recruitment hit its lowest point in 30 years. Colonel Casey Wardinsky was an economics professor at West Point studying the recruitment problem. He realized that the Army needed to speak a new language. He convinced the Pentagon to bankroll the development of a computer game that could sell the Army to a digital generation.
The only video game developed by the world's premier land force.
It's called America's Army.
From the barracks to the battlefield, it's the most authentic military game ever.
What we want to do is sort of create a revolution in the way we talk to kids. We want to be in the business of conveying information about being a soldier in ways that are relevant.
To reach the gamer generation, Wardinsky turned to the players themselves for help. He hired a commercial games developer, bypassing the usual Army channels. America's Army is played on the internet, and its goal is to get young people to consider joining the Army to fight for their country.
It's allowing them to speak through the media that they're paying the most attention to. It's not TV ads, it's not ads in movie theaters, it's games.
The game is designed to put young people in direct contact with real soldiers. America's Army is available for free download, and it is played on the military's own computer servers. Enlisted soldiers are also encouraged to play.
What they really wanted to do was build a place where civilians and servicemen would play together, talk together, bond socially, and be part of a discussion about what it was to join the military lifestyle. Because if you did that, it would become much more attractive to younger people.
America's Army is an unprecedented appeal directly into the bedrooms of kids all over the United States. The homepage of the game contains a link that takes young people right to the U.S. Army recruitment website.
You don't get to be somebody's top choice if you wait until like age 18. When you wait till age 18 to talk to them, you're probably a fallback position.
I'm certain there are kids that have joined the Army because they thought America's Army was really cool. Because they understand that there's kind of a blurring going on, you know? I mean, not necessarily in a good way. I mean, recruits are walking in because they think it's going to be like a video game.
Just like in the real Army, kids who play are taught to handle weapons and to shoot. The game also contains elements of realism that set it apart from other shooter games. In most games, a player can immediately come back to life after being killed. But in America's Army, a dead player does not come back to life until after the game is finished.
A lot of the other games will get concerned trying to Hollywood it out with ridiculous stories, and although you're having a good time, it's not a very emotional time. You don't really care what happens. There's no punishment, because no matter what stupid thing you do next, you'll just be right back in the game.
To ensure that the young game designers create a game that reflects the goals of the Army, each year they take them out of their California offices for a 3-day boot camp. The idea is to introduce them to the latest weapons and the latest tactics.
Hey, there's my guy. You're in desert this year. Last year was woodland. Mostly dead grass today. Yeah, so in the right colors.
We bring them to what we clean up and let them touch the pieces of the Army they're going to end up modeling, so that that realism can come across in high fidelity, at least the highest fidelities we can master in the virtual world.
Okay, it'll decock itself for you. You put it back on fire, you can see the red dot is fire. Now it's on double action.
These vehicles are to represent targets that might be
The
close
Army
to that,
also wants to expose the gamers to the weapons used by the enemies of the United States. This time, they demonstrate the power of the roadside bombs that are a favorite of the insurgents in Iraq.
If you are interested in building a military society where people know how to use weaponry and are somewhat desensitized to the loss of human life, then video games can be a fairly effective way.
Of its battle plans, and the Army is now the single biggest partner of the commercial games industry in the country.
So if we have an environment, let's say that we wanted an object to look like it was photographed in Fallujah, we go in and capture the lighting in Fallujah, okay, which has very specific characteristics. There'll be a certain amount of aerial haze, there'll be a certain kind of character to the light at a particular time of day, etc.
We are, particularly in America today, we are a very militaristic society. We take for granted that there are going to be major military conflicts in the world and we're going to be involved in them. Video games are just a part of that cultural manifestation of being a military society.
1720.
The Army has opened a massive high-tech training studio at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. They're using game technology, virtual reality, and sophisticated simulations of the Middle East to prepare the digital generation for war. The Army believes that this kind of training works because almost every soldier who joins is a gamer.
Engagement successful, target destroyed.
The games are part of an effort to gain the upper hand in an era of ever-shifting battle conditions. Many of the soldiers heading off to fight have never been outside the United States. The idea is to allow the soldier to get a dry run on the reality that awaits them.
If I can put him into an environment where he actually knows what to expect, then I have an edge up on the enemy that is immeasurable, that's invaluable.
This is a hostile area.
But this approach has its critics. Not everyone is convinced computer games can prepare young people for the reality of guerrilla warfare.
You know, when a number of people said that modern war is virtual, that the first Gulf War was like a Nintendo game, you know, in the sense that people pushed buttons and fired things at each other, but they never saw each other. And that's one reason why the horror of terrorism hits the military so greatly, is it's in your face, it's brute, it's not distance. People blow themselves up to get at you. That's so different from a world where you're just hitting, where the enemy is a blip on the screen.
The United States Army has thrown its full weight behind computer games as a way to attract and train the next generation of soldiers. It is an idea that is gaining strength in other parts of the world. Syria is a dictatorship that has had one-party rule since 1970. Anti-American sentiment is intense and widespread. Like all dictatorships, Syria fears the spread of information. 10 years ago, you needed a security clearance to own a fax machine. Now, it's struggling to control the impact of a wired world. The influence of pirated Western computer games is a looming threat. Their exploding popularity has the regime watching with apprehension. As more young people are drawn to Western games, there is concern about their impact on young Muslim minds. In almost every military-themed game, Arabs are the enemy. In the eyes of Syrian nationalists, Arab kids are being trained to kill their own people.
They are playing games like that regardless the mission. Maybe the mission bombard your own house or your own town.
The Americans make the games. They get you to have fun while you are killing Arabs. They expect us to entertain ourselves with these games. They show us how to kill Arabs and say, go ahead, have fun. Killing Arabs is not fun. On the contrary, it makes one get really mad. Why are they killing us? Why is it not that we are killing them?
We are losers, and look, they are showing us losing every day. We are losing all over the world.
Radwan Kazmia is a Syrian game developer with an agenda. With the full backing of the government, he has set up a company to produce games designed to incite the passions of the young men of the Arab world. As the backdrop for his first game, Kazmia selects one of the most incendiary events in recent memory, the Hebron massacre of 1994. A fanatical Israeli settler named Baruch Goldstein took an automatic weapon into a mosque in the city of Hebron. The game always launches with a frightening depiction of Goldstein in the moments leading up to the massacre. He killed 29 worshippers and injured 125. In the wake of the bloodbath, dozens more Palestinians were killed as the Israeli army attempted to quash the riots. The game is called Under Siege. The player assumes the role of a young Palestinian caught up in the aftermath of the massacre. His goal is to kill Israeli soldiers. Under Siege depicts the Israeli military as a force of brutality and terror. The effort to reach the gamer generation in the Middle East has a particular urgency. 70% of the population is under the age of 25. The size of the youth bubble has caught the attention of the old-style Arab media. In 2005, one of the biggest book publishers in the Middle East, Dar al-Fakr, made a deal with Radwan's company to distribute Under Siege throughout the region. Dar al-Fakr has deep roots in the regime, and it recognizes the role that games are playing in the lives of young Arabs.
The trend is toward games because they give the youth things that books cannot offer. Computer games present color, motion, 3 dimensions that are tempting and that facilitate the acquisition of knowledge. The young man deeply interacts with the game and will practice the knowledge he is getting from the game firsthand. So here, he is not merely a recipient, rather he is an active participant.
The game puts you in the thick of it. It immerses you in the scene of war and in the midst of helping Palestinians. So for sure the experience I gained is more than I would have reading a book.
With the aggressive marketing of Dar al-Fakr behind him, Radwan sold over 100,000 copies of Under Siege throughout the Middle East. The financial success allows Radwan to develop new games for his market.
So when we present Under Siege for them, well, that's a game that's speaking our voice, that's speaking our minds, and this is what we call digital dignity. They play with it, they are proud of it.
I like the game because it motivates us. It motivates all Arabs to free Palestine, to unite together and liberate Palestine. All Arabs should play this game. The game makes us feel that we are there and we are the ones shooting at the Israelis and killing them.
The most joy I get is the sparkling eyes of these kids when they see our work. It's the most rewards I can ever get. You know, when they see your work, you got your prize.
Games like Under Siege use violence as a way of promoting an agenda. But in many computer games, the violence is an end in itself. The computer games that attract the most attention are those with ultra-violent content. Many parents worry these games will make their kids more aggressive.
The game industry is sadly addicted to the idea of violence, and that's for a couple reasons. One is that they're still trying to go time and time again after teenage boys, and teenage boys love watching stuff blow up. The second thing is that a lot of video games are fundamentally, still in a very simple way, about things colliding with other things.
Adolescent male culture is very fascinated with feeling powerful because they feel disempowered at that particular age. They're sort of betwixt and between. They're an adolescent culture where there's a lot of frustration, both socially, class-wise, and sexually. And so being able to sort of go out there and really have literal life and death power over others is enormously attractive to that group of people in that time in their lives.
The controversy revolves around one kind of violent game, the first-person shooter. To many, they are the demon child of the computer game industry.
Fire in the hole! Bomb hit.
In a first-person shooter, the game takes place through the eyes of the player wielding a weapon.
Hey, friendly fire! Emergency!
First-person shooters tend to professionalize, in many ways, the pursuit of violence and to move it towards an interest in weaponry and sort of this roving, nomadic form of becoming a killing machine.
The reason why people worry about first-person shooters is that they're intentionally, over the top. These are the bad boys of the video game world. To a certain extent, they're sort of the modern rock music, because they just rub the parents' noses in it. They're like, we're gonna have, realistic exit wounds. When you shoot people, it's gonna blow a hole in their back.
The game called Postal is banned in 13 countries. In Australia and New Zealand, it's against the law to even own this game.
So there's always one part of culture that basically exists to sort of allow us to just completely let our most antisocial, most horrible desires run free.
Its creator sees the game as an over-the-top satire.
Postal is really a parody of American pop culture today. The violent aspect is an element of the game, clearly. However, the humor is really what we find most attractive.
Some of the most violent games like Grand Theft Auto and Postal are obviously, from an adult perspective, meant to be funny and satirical. But at what age can children really start to pick that up? Because there may be some things that, as an adult, we look at and we get it. That's a joke. It's satire.
Now that's what I call welfare reform. Free!
And the kids that are 11, 12, 13, 14, they're not getting it.
In the last few years, the concern over violent computer games has moved into the laboratory. At Michigan State University, a young researcher hopes some cutting-edge technology will shine a light into the minds of computer gamers. Renee Weber is using functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, to study the brain activity of gamers playing a violent video game.
We actually can see how you think, how you feel while you are playing a video game.
In Weber's study, the brains of 13 young men are observed inside an fMRI scanner as they play a first-person shooter. All are regular gamers. Previous neurological research has shown which areas of the brain light up when we have aggressive feelings. The purpose of this experiment is to see whether these same areas are activated when playing violent games. Weber has played shooter games his whole adult life and wanted to prove they have no negative effects.
We wanted to show that playing violent video game is just playing a game and has nothing to do with aggressive cognitions, aggressive effects, and even aggressive behavior.
What Weber needed was hard scientific evidence to back up his theory that the games are harmless. The results of his experiments were not what he expected. Renee Weber's study is the first time that science has looked at the brain activity of kids engaged in hardcore virtual violence.
I don't see him moving in there, and there's less motion on the images.
Very much. He also plays a more interesting map, actually. That's more activity. That may be a reason, because he's more immersed in the gameplay.
Weber's experiment compares the brain activity of the gamer with the violent content of the game.
Okay, here. Oh, what a great anterior cingulate cortex.
Weber found clear evidence of dramatic effects on the brain.
Once we got our results, we were actually amazed. We could see that playing first-person shooter game translates into brain activity that is characteristic for aggressive cognitions and aggressive effects.
Weber's work is conclusive evidence that playing first-person shooter games produces aggressive impulses in the player's brain.
We have to make an important distinction between aggressive effects, which is aggressive feelings or emotions, and aggressive behavior, acting aggressively.
There is no clear link between aggressive brain activity and violent behavior. Many people still worry about the effect of violent video games on troubled kids.
The problem is not that violent games make all kids violent. The problem is that some kids are violent because of the games.
Jack Thompson is a Florida-based lawyer who has repeatedly gone after the video game industry for its violent products. He argues that the immersive nature of first-person shooters puts them in a whole different class.
This is an entertainment modality that is beyond anything the world has ever seen. Its interactive nature means that it is more powerful.
In the last decade, there have been more than 20 shooting sprees carried out by young people with a history of playing first-person shooter games.
They offer a way to act out the dark side of a troubled soul. You get to kill, you get to maim, you get to hurt without caring, you get to do all kinds of things that are candy for a troubled soul.
In 1997, in Paducah, Kentucky, a 14-year-old boy named Michael Carneal brought a gun to school. He fired 8 shots and with 100% accuracy shot 8 people. 5 of his victims were shot in the head.
I became convinced that the game, Doom, and other games that Carneal played provided the tipping point for Carneal to do what he did.
His marksmanship was astonishing. He had fired a real gun on only one other occasion, but he had spent hundreds of hours playing violent shooter games. Many of these games give bonus points for headshots.
Gun experts will explain that the face is the clearest marker of specific human identity, and therefore, unless you've been desensitized to the doing that, you're not going to shoot somebody in the face, because that last split second you're going to see their face and you're going to know it's a specific human being.
The event that seared violent games into the collective consciousness was the murders at Columbine. For the first time, gamers became the enemy.
Well, what happened after Columbine was a desire to round up all the gamers. So what you saw in schools across America was school psychologists sending kids off to therapy because they like to play games.
The moral panic over games seems to be receding.
That generation that started playing video games when they were young is now growing into adulthood. So the kids who started playing Super Mario Brothers 2 decades ago are now parents, they're now first-year teachers, they're now young professionals, they're now journalists. It's much harder to sustain a panic about a medium that's been part of your life for as long as you can remember.
The generation that has grown up with computer games is now driving them to the next level. A new wave of so-called serious games are based on a simple revolutionary idea. Take the immersive power of computer games and use it to help people and spread knowledge. Here, the shooter concept is turned on its head. In Russian, you're not taking lives, you save them by blasting cancer cells.
If you shoot a whole bunch of them and then you miss one, multiply and make a whole bunch more that you had to kill later on. Chemo is your primary weapon in the game. As you're attacking them, they'll lunge at you to try to kill you.
To win the game, the player must cure all the patients.
We now are discovering that games are powerful resources for learning and getting people to do things. When we do things that matter to us, we feel a sense of engagement. Games are very powerful mechanisms for creating rules and roles that leave us feeling more engaged.
Projects like Remission are a glimpse into the future, where games are an important part of how we live and learn.
Right now, we hold games apart as a special kind of experience because they're aimed at the young. But in fact, sooner or later, they're going to be integrated back into the sum total of human experience. That as we begin to use games in hospitals for medical treatment, as we use games in psychological clinics for therapy, as we use games to teach, games will cease to be called games. They will simply be a medium of expression we use to do a variety of other functions within our society.
As we find more and more ways to use games, they increasingly resemble life itself.
When you live inside an online world like World of Warcraft for a long time, it really starts to feel like your home. And your people there really seem to feel like your people. People get married inside these games. And that's a really amazing, deep, complex emotion that no one gets from a book or a movie. You get it from living in an experience, and that's something games do.
In Episode 2, we enter the virtual world of online games, a world without rules, without limits. In this world, you leave your earthly existence behind to explore your fantasies. We journey to a small town, 100 miles from the Arctic Circle, for the largest gathering of online gamers on the planet. A hustling entrepreneur gambles on becoming the first virtual Donald Trump, spending 6 figures on a piece of real estate that exists only in virtual space. Games are approaching the final frontier, sex. In the world of online sex games, everyone is a sexual superhero. Virtual money, virtual power, and the search for virtual fame. The world of online games is like no place on earth.